So today's video is going to be a landscape video. I've got some 100F, I've got my Pentax, and what I'm doing now is I'm just driving around the North Cornish Coast. I'm heading to somewhere called Bedruthan Steps, and it's about 10-15 minutes away from here, I hope. I'm not using a sat nav, I'm doing this from memory, and I'm running a little bit late. The sun's getting kind of low in the sky, but I should be there with enough time. I'm a couple of miles inland at the moment, so obviously when I get onto the coast, the sun will still be up. I don't know if it's a bit dark on the video, but what I'm planning to do is set up both tripods and talk you guys through shooting some slides. Now, I've got a spot meter, I've got some filters I might have to use. Part of the fear around shooting slides is just how easy they are to blow out. If you use the in-camera meter, you can get kind of inconsistent results, but if you can use a spot meter and you really dial it in, it's perfectly easy to do. The plan is set up, show you how to meter, show you if I need any filters, take some shots. What I'll do is I'll film the first couple of shots with this, and maybe I'll have enough time to walk around with both tripods. If not, I'll leave this somewhere and I'll head on and finish off my roll. I've got a few more days in Cornwall, so I'm not going to blow through too much Provia, but yeah, if it comes to it, I can also shoot a roll of Portrait, and you can kind of compare and see if you prefer the Portrait or you prefer the Provia or that kind of thing. So I've got to Bedruthan Steps. I think that I actually timed it better than I thought because I can still see. That's a good sign. The sun, I mean, it's going to overexpose the sensor, but it's still fairly high in the sky. I have got a huge amount of kit on my bag. So yeah, the idea is to get set up and then just sit for a bit, have a little break. When the sun gets lower, the colours will come out and I'll be able to start shooting. There's also quite a lot of swell, which I quite like. I'm looking over, I'll show you guys what I can see. So I've only been here for 5 minutes, but I've just got to this cliff edge and I pulled the camera out. It turns out I had a roll of Portrait loaded. I've taken 2 frames. One is down onto one of these rocks over my shoulder. I tried to time this one so that I got the wave breaking over the rock. I'm not sure I timed it perfectly, but I really like the blue that the Portrait has managed to pull out of this. And I've taken another one with a wider angle lens just out, getting this outcrop with a couple of the seagulls. Now this was taken handheld. I kind of saw the light on the rocks and immediately took it. It's interesting because almost immediately after this I took the same shot on Provia, so in a second we'll have them side by side for a comparison. I'm going to load the first Provia now. I'm kind of hunched over my bag. Here's what I'm working with. Okay, so I'm setting up for my first shot. This is my spot meter. Now what I've done is I've plugged in a film speed of 120 ISO, and that's because I want to moderately underexpose, just to protect as much highlights as I can. Bit of a lazy technique, but if you're ever worried about shooting your slides, just uprate it by whatever one click is on your light meter. I'm using a 55mm lens. It's pretty much a wide. It's a 28mm equivalent when you're talking 35mm. I can't really show you the view through my spot meter because it has a very small viewfinder, but this is where I placed my 1 degree circle. Now, some people like to average the entire scene, but for this, I used this patch of grass with the knowledge that I was underexposing it by around 1/3 of a stop. The idea here is to aim for a mid-tone, but just bear in mind the latitude of your film and how much you can go over and under as you do so. My meter says that I'm shooting at f4 at 1/30th of a second. Obviously that is really pushing what's possible without using a cable release. So I'm going to be using this, and I'm going to be using mirror up mode as well. Obviously it does say a 30th at f4, but I'm going to be using probably an 8th or a 15th and just bumping the aperture up a bit as well. I'm going to go for a 15th to f5.6. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get the depth of field I need, so I could either focus stack and take one shot including the foreground and one shot including the background. In this instance, because it's quite expensive film, what I'm going to do is I'm going to forgo the foreground and actually focus kind of midway into the scene. That will give me center sharpness, a little bit of background sharpness, and having the foreground out of focus won't be too big a deal. Now, the one filter I'm going to use for this shot is a circular polarizer. You can see the glare coming off the water. In fact, you can't because the video camera is polarized, but I can see it. So I'm going to use this circular polarizer. It does take another stop off my exposure, but there's not much I can do about this. Essentially, I'm shooting a 60 ISO speed now, but it's going to be worth it. Let's have a look. Honestly, the view through the viewfinder here is absolutely stunning. I'm just going to take this one because I need this shot. See how unstable this tripod is with the camera over the center stem. I'm going to take another one and actually brace it here a bit. And here's the first Provia shot. My shutter speed's a little bit lower. Obviously this shot's polarized where the last shot wasn't. But if I put it next to the portrait, you can have a look and maybe decide for yourself which one you prefer. The polarizer makes it a little bit unfair, but I think the Provia is winning this one. Now, the sky's darker because of the polarizer effect, but you can also see there's a difference in the color in the sort of the grass of the cliffside. It's obviously up for personal preference, but I'm going to side with the Provia. Okay guys, that's my first two shots. I'm pretty stoked about the light. I hope it looks equally as sort of as red to the camera as it does to my eyes. I'm getting these wild plumes of spray. I'm going to move this over so you can see as well. So the location is great and the light is absolutely fantastic. The one problem I'm having is that the sun is setting pretty quickly and I'm really racing to get as many shots as I can. If you look, that's where I'm going now, if I let the camera focus. What I'm going to try and do is give some slightly longer exposures and really eke out that last bit of evening light. Okay, this is probably going to be my last location today because the light's falling really fast. I have been rushing around a bit, and because I've got the two tripods, it's been tricky to really show you everything I've done. This last shot is going to be a long exposure. I don't even need to use filters for that. It's just that 100 speed film with light this low, it's going to be a couple of seconds, maybe up to 30 seconds at around f11. I can tell you a more exact number. I have got my spot meter right here. What I'm going to try and do is capture with a wide lens this scene of the waves hitting the rocks, and then the colours and the kind of the changing colour of the sky as the sun sets. I think the sun has just gone below the horizon, so this is kind of like the twilight shot. You only really get 20 minutes to do this, so I'm going to have to try and take one or two and really nail it. I'm going to set my meter to 60 ISO because I'm going to account for the polarizing filter with this. I'm also going to use a gradated filter to take some of the color into the sky, but I'm not going to account for that because I know that the sky is going to be the problem area. So it's I've done that maths, and I'm just going to apply that as the last step. I'm setting this to 60 and I'm going to take my reading off one of the rock stacks, or I'm going to get some of the surface of the water that's in the shade. I think that between those two I'll get a pretty good estimate. Okay, I'm getting a reading on here of 8 seconds at f11. 8 seconds at f16. I think I'm going to take that as my final meter reading. Because the sun is setting, the light level is constantly dropping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump that another third of a stop. So yeah, okay, let's go with that. So that's saying between 16 and 11 at 8 seconds. I'll work from that as a basis. I'd like to say that it isn't usually this hectic, but when you're chasing particular light, like a sunset or a sunrise, it does have a mad scramble around the good light, and then you have loads of time to walk home in the dark. F11 at 8 seconds is what I'm going to set the camera for. So circular polarizer, bit of glare reduction. And I'm going to use this 0.6 soft grad, and I'm going to place that in line with the sky. It's kind of upsetting because my long exposure is going to take all of the birds out of the scene, and I feel they really add to it. If I had Portrait 100 or something, I'd maybe go for a wide open shot and see if I could capture them with a 60th, but it's going to be a long exposure for this lens. I'm taking off my prism finder because I want to see if I can get as much foreground as I can in this shot, and this actually crops my frame a bit. These are really delicate, so if you do start doing what I do, make sure you wrap it in a cloth before it goes back in your bag. Because I'm using f11, I'm not going to be focusing on a particular rock or a particular area. What I'm going to be doing is setting my infinity distance to the f11 marker on the hyperfocal scale. That means that I'm maximizing my depth of field, and it also means that because I have all these filters stacked, I don't have to look through them to focus. The camera does it, the lens does it for me. This is all set to go. I'm just going to do one last thing, which is to check the reciprocity. Now, this is really important if you're using negative films, particularly black and white films or high-speed color. It's a weird property of film that doubling the exposure isn't always as simple as doubling the time. Once you get into the long exposures, and I'd say that's anything over 5 seconds, things can get a little weird. I'm using an app called Reciprocity Timer. I'm going to record my phone screen actually so you can see what I'm doing. What I'm going to do is scroll up to Fuji, Provia 100F, and put in my time of 8 seconds. Now, this is giving me a time of 8 seconds, but just for the sense of letting you guys know what I'm doing this for, if I was to set my film to Fomapan 100, for example, this 8-second exposure would actually require 56 seconds of light capture. Fujifilm, be it color, negative, or black and white, are pretty good about it. Acros is one of the best black and white films for reciprocity. Obviously that's just been discontinued. Slide films in general are really good at dealing with it, but this is a super important step if you want to use long exposures with film. I know it's 8 seconds. I'm going to give it 15 because even though it's slide film, I do feel it could do with that slight push. What I'm going to do is take one 15-second exposure followed by one 30-second exposure without adjusting for either the aperture or the changing light levels. Those two shots will give me quite a nice range. One of them will accentuate the sky, one of them will accentuate the water. I've got to get going with this because I'm losing light. Okay, that was my 15-second exposure. I'm going to cock the shutter again and immediately go into the second one.
So this is the 15-second exposure. I made a bit of a mistake here because the 30-second slide was really blown out. This one is just on the verge of being overexposed. It does give quite an interesting look to the water, which obviously didn't have the benefit of the neutral density filter. I quite like it. I do like the patterns that the waves make in the surface. If I could go back and do this again, what I'd do is I'd shoot this as my first exposure, and my second exposure would actually be half the time. I think that would have given me a more rounded image.
Okay, I've taken 2 exposures here so I can kind of relax a bit. I was a bit hectic, I was running around, but I'm now just going to relax. I'm going to put my prism back on so I don't get that camera full of dust, and I'm pretty happy with what I've got. My frame counter says I've taken 7 frames, so you've seen me shoot 5 of them.
I'll show you a couple of the other shots. I didn't set the camera up because it's quite a simple composition. It's just the reflection and the play of the light on the water. This is the other shot I took using the 105mm lens. Now, I took this right as I was setting up for the final long exposure, and I didn't use any filters, so I guess this image can give you a slight feel for what the polarizer is doing to the surface of the water. I like the sort of the increased detail because it's cropped in, but I'm not sure it's as strong an image as the other one.
It is a hell of a view, so I'm going to set the camera up and you can watch that while I pack up.